Introduction. The history of Sayyid Muhammad is the history of the Dervish movement that has been against the occupation of Somalia for 21 years. Today there are evidence that the wars of the Dervish were for independence and the struggle of the Somali nation has gone through for its independence in the past 1,000 years. Sayyid Muhammad Abdul Hassan was a fearless fighter who did not lack knowledge, a religious scholar who was a strong debater, and a poet who was full of attention and understanding. These characteristics together gave the mullah a remarkable personality of high quality. That personality itself is what made it possible for the mullah to keep fighting for such a long time. The early historians did not fully realize the special value of Sayyid Muhammad Abdul Hassan's poetry, and they never understood the power of ideology and the sharp debate in his verses and prose. The early historians analyzed the nature of the Sayyid in terms of his beliefs, giving it as a reason for the hatred colonial forces and the fact that Somalis followed the Dervish movement. It is true that the mullah protested against the rule of the Somali land by foreign people. He believed that it is the duty of the Somali person to liberate his land and restore the dignity and honor of the Somali nation that was damaged by the abuse. It seemed to the mullah that the Dervish were in the front line of the war. Therefore, Imi deserves a special mention as the place where Sayyid died in 1921, intending to bring new enemies together and renew the war against the colonial forces. The same city Imi was the place where Ras Mukannon was captured 30 years before in 1891. The Viceroy Menelik, who was sitting in Harar to eat the freedom of the Somali nation. These things are not coincidences, and they bear witness to the series of struggles of the Somali nation and the ongoing mission of its unity. Although this book is not about Sayyid Muhammad and his personal life, it tells about the history of Darawishes in general, but Sayyid Muhammad created Darawishes and carried the flag. Sheikh Jama Umar, who has studied a lot in the collection of legends and the history of the Darawishes, has endeavored to reveal in this book many aspects of the history of the Darawishes that were not properly known before. There is no doubt that because of this, scholars and the general public will benefit a lot from this book. In the end, Sheikh Jama Umar judged for the master whom many foreign historians have biased, and in other times they have broken the pattern, without really knowing the double personality of Sayyid Abdul Hassan. It is true that the mullah protested against the rule of the Somali land by foreign people. He believed that it is the duty of the Somali person to liberate his land and restore the dignity and honor of the Somali nation that was damaged by the abuse. It seemed to the mullah that the Dervish were in the front line of the war. Therefore, Imi deserves a special mention as the place where Sayyid died in 1921, intending to bring new enemies together and renew the war against the colonial forces. The same city Imi was the place where Ras Mukannon was captured 30 years before in 1891. The Viceroy Menelik, who was sitting in Harar to eat the freedom of the Somali nation. These things are not coincidences, and they bear witness to the series of struggles of the Somali nation and the ongoing mission of its unity. Although this book is not about Sayyid Muhammad and his personal life, it tells about the history of Darawishes in general, but Sayyid Muhammad created Darawishes and carried the flag. Sheikh Jama Umar, who has studied a lot in the collection of legends and the history of the Darawishes, has endeavored to reveal in this book many aspects of the history of the Darawishes that were not properly known before. There is no doubt that because of this, scholars and the general public will benefit a lot from this book. In the end, Sheikh Jama Umar judged for the master whom many foreign historians have biased, and in other times they have broken the pattern, without really knowing the double personality of Sayyid Abdul Hassan. Before giving an indication of the history of this book, it is appropriate to give a few examples of the colonialism that entered Somalia, its interest, and the things it did or did to it. As a matter of fact, in the latter part of the 19th century, there was a fierce competition between the European states in Africa. Some of these states wanted land to harvest precious things: gold, diamonds, cotton, copper, coal, ivory, and industrial products, and some wanted land to get food their land lacks, Others wanted a place to fly to if there was a war in the world or if other governments were to restrict them in terms of trade. The competition that a party also wanted to achieve its own interests led to the agreement signed in Berlin in 1884. The Second Treaty of Berlin in February 1885, in which Africa was divided, opened a new competition. One of the provisions of that agreement was that any government that makes an agreement with the people living in a land has the right to stop trading in that land after notifying the governments that participated in that agreement. At that time, Africa saw a lot or met a white man from Europe walking with an old man who was the head of a people in a place and heard his name, or a king of a nation ruling a place, holding power and wealth in his right hand. In the other hand, a clear letter that he wants to write a business or friendship agreement with that king or mayor. However, his purpose is far from that, and he intends to take over the land and colonize the people. Therefore, in 1884, the British, which was the protector of the colony, settled in the north coast and southwest regions of the Somali country. Similarly, in 1883, the French established a base in Obok on the coast of Djibouti. In 1892, Italy leased Banadir Beach from the Sultan of Zanzibar. Italy and the Sultan were brokers for the British, who were keeping Germany away from the East African coast. Ethiopia, which was an African state, also participated in the competition, and it invaded Herer in 1897, with the British supporting its occupation. At the same time, the Ethiopians did not stop here, but with the help of the British, they entered the Somali country and occupied 3 different places until they reached the current border between the Ethiopians and the Somalis. Therefore, although those invasions and attacks were intended for the colonial power and wealth and they missed the most, he faced many problems and many people and wealth left him. Not only the Dervish War, there were many wars that took place in many different places in the country. It is worth noting the war between Italy Ajuran, Seles Gorgat, and Baimal in 1904 to 1912, which took place in the area now known as the Lower Shabelle, and several successive wars, which took place in Kismayo, Afmadao, Saranlay, and Luk, the Battle of Sheikh Hassan Barsain, Elba, and battles that took place in Bidialo, Assur, Bargal, Herdia, which are the coasts of the eastern region. In 1926, the Dervish War, led by Said Mohammed, was from 1900 to 1920 and reached a bloodshed until the British ended it with air raid. So, let's ask ourselves, what was Said Mohammed? Some people think that he was a patriotic veteran who defended his country, his people, and his religion. Others believe that he was a Madmulla that killed people. When we look at the two parties neutrally and impartially, let's judge the letters he wrote, the poems he wrote, the wars he fought. However, there is false propaganda and evil that people have been spreading, and they may believe it in the future if we do not touch the truth. This book tells about what happened between the dervishes and the colonialists, and it is divided into 5:1. The first part tells about Said Mohammed and the history of his life since the war broke out in 1901. 2. The second part deals with the 5 major wars of 1901 to 1905. 3. The third part tells about what happened in 1905 to 191, and it is the part where the talk started and the politics and wars went on together. 4. The fourth part gives an indication of what happened when the dervishes moved from Ail and Ilik in 1911 to 1917. 5. The fifth part refers to what happened to the dervishes during 1917 to 1921. Each section is dedicated to some of them, and it has a small introduction at the front about that section. In this book, there are many letters exchanged between Said Mohammed and the British, Italians, and the Said. These letters were written in different languages, English, Italian, and Arabic, but we tried to translate most of them into Somali so that people who do not know foreign languages can understand them. We have tried everything we have said in this book to find clear evidence to distinguish between truth and falsehood. Said used to write letters in Arabic. The British translated it, It may not have been translated as the truth, and some words were chosen or left out, because the mullah had very hot words. When he speaks the truth or touches the wound, the Englishman will surely feel bad, so it is possible that the words were translated differently or omitted. That happened. Douglas Jardine, who was the best among the Darawish writers, took most of the letters from the general context, and did not translate them as they were, and this was seen when a few of the original letters were found and looked at. It is certain that if the Arabic language was first translated into English and then the English language was translated into Somali language, the meaning and sweetness of the speech would be lost, because it is said that a broken bone never restores the same. Some people may say why it was written in both languages, not just one. So, we did it because we are trying not to stray from the truth. Parts, each part dealing with a specific period. Even though the men who wrote these books were telling about their governments and giving them victory, the Darawish War and Sayyid Muhammad's were not hidden. That is why you always see historians avoiding the truth or covering up the atrocities committed by and against their governments with lies. Although this happened, the truth is very important. Perhaps, in some places, you see a matter that should be managed in a different way, so add advice to the world as it was then and the level it is going through today. What happened between colonialist, Darawish and other Somalis in 1895 to 1921 cannot be told in any language or written in a book. If you see any errors or mistakes in this book, it is not our intention but our knowledge. You are expected to fix it. It is appropriate to thank you. Like, share, subscribe, and comment.